Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Okay, you did a good job. Let's try it. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, awesome. Well, on behalf of the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution, I want to welcome you to tonight's opening session for our fall 2025 Peace Week. This event is entitled From Hiroshima to Hope, a call for a nuclear arms-free world. Now, I'm sure most of you here have probably registered for some of our Peace Week sessions, and we're happy that you've done that. But throughout Peace Week, our theme for this year is bridging peace building, development, and security. And this challenges us to break down silos and reimagine how we approach some of the world's most urgent threats. And I think we can all agree that there's a lot that's happening in the world right now. So this year's Peace Week, at least in the fall, really has a special meaning, not to the Carter School community, but really to all of us, because I believe some of us are impacted in a number of ways. This evening sets the tone through a powerful combination of storytelling, art, scholarship, and activism. Tonight, you'll hear the voices of some extraordinary individuals who have dedicated their lives to this cause, peace. From community leaders to curators to scholars, Nobel Peace Prize laureates, and also our students. Now, if you were one of the early birds this evening, you had the special opportunity to view the Hiroshima Children's Drawing Exhibit that's across the room and in our art gallery, and also to view the powerful documentary, which is based on this exhibit, Pictures from a Hiroshima Schoolyard. And as they say, the early bird gets the worm, or in this case, you all, as the early birds, a deeply moving head start to the evening. So thank you for coming early and being a part of the exhibit. Now, this is the part you all have all been waiting for. I know that no one really came here to hear me speak. So it is my pleasure to introduce someone whose leadership continues to shape the Carter School's global peace-building vision. As our dean, he has championed our work in nuclear conflict transformation, spearheaded our role as the new chair of the SDG 16 Global Hub, and helped deepen partnerships across borders and sectors. So, before he comes to the stage, I just want to share this really quickly. This is called, tell me again, Mel. Origami peace grains. And the concept of this was developed by a young Hiroshima survivor around 7 years old. And she was told that if she made a thousand of these, that she would be healed. She was suffering with the effects of Hiroshima. And so, Mel, you can correct me, but this symbolizes peace in a world free from nuclear arms. So if you're wondering what this represents, this is what it represents. All right? So feel free to take it with you, just as a memory and maybe something to help us have a nuclear-free world. All right, so please join me in welcoming our dean, Dean Alp Ozaderm, to the stage.
Good evening, everyone. And I'm not sure whether you were waiting for me to speak all night, and I'm not certainly the highlight of this evening, but it's a great opportunity for me to address you at the opening of this important event, our Hiroshima event, which is the flagship event of our Peace Week, Fall Peace Week 2025. So as the Dean of the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution, I'm delighted to welcome you all. And before talking about this event itself, and obviously I'm going to take the opportunity of, having a captive audience just to talk about a little bit about the Peace Week and the Carter School and why we do this, why it matters. So we've been organizing the Peace Week since fall 2020. And already this has become a tradition, a permanent feature of the Carter School. And I must say, right now, it's in our DNA. And the Peace Week, in a way, shows that, how much we care, the public participation and the public engagement. Because there are a few things that matter for the Carter School. Our high-quality scholarship and our research, but also our impact in the real world. And I see the Peace Week as a great way of reaching out to public. And all our events, like this year in fall 2025, we have around 30 events this week. And nice thing here this year is that almost half of them are sponsored and organized by our colleagues outside George Mason University. That shows the collaboration and the partnership, true partnerships that we have with a wide range of organizations outside the George Mason University. So I think that's really delightful. And with that, I just want to mention that, Peace Week means lots of work, lots of things to organize. Around 30 events of different types, from the roundtables to exhibitions to fireside chats. It requires true teamwork. And I'm so proud of my team here at the Carter School, tirelessly organizing this event year after year. And I want to thank your Ordemet Mercedes Azop for organizing the week, but also particularly this evening, this event, Hiroshima event that we are holding. And with that, I just want to recognize few groups of people. There are so many individuals I want to recognize, but I want to just do this in groups. So to start with, I want to recognize the Carter School faculty, staff, students, alumni, donors, and our supporters who are here this evening. These are people who are integral part of who we are and what we do. And but with that, I'm particularly honored to welcome Professor Asano, Professor Kuroda, and Professor Kumagai from Japan, who are joining us this evening. They are here for a joint project with our Professor Karina Korestelina. And having our Japanese colleagues being part of Hiroshima event, I think is particularly honorable and it's a great opportunity. Also, we have Delegate Mark Sickles here, and he's part of our advisory board, and I'm so glad that he's able to join us. There are a number of Rotarians here in the room, and that's also really delightful because we have really strong partnership with Rotary. That's just like probably for another meeting for me to talk about. But that is really great that, what we do, scaling up peace work. And finally, I want to share with you a piece of good news. So recently we completed our Associate Dean search. And Dr. Supriya Bailey over there has just joined us. So in a very selfish way, as the Dean of the school, having an Associate Dean who just joined us, and if that person is somebody like Dr. Bailey, I'm so kind of over the moon, and I think that's really fantastic. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So let me just give me the opportunity to just say a few things about this evening's event and why we are here. So this year marks the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. a moment in history that forever altered our global consciousness. Tonight, we gather not only to reflect on the immense human cost of nuclear war, but also to reaffirm our collective commitment to peace, disarmament, and global justice. So back in May, I had the privilege and opportunity of being in Hiroshima. I went there for a peacebuilding project funded by the US State Department between young people from Korea and Japan working on the issues of peace engineering, the application of technology in conflict prevention and peacebuilding. And my time in Hiroshima left a profound impression on me. I was deeply moved by how the city has transformed a history of unimaginable devastation into a living global peace project. Hiroshima's journey from destruction to a beacon of hope stands as one of the world's most powerful examples of resilience and reconciliation. The way the city has turned tragedy into a driving force for peacebuilding offers inspiration for all of us. So, ladies and gentlemen, at the Carter School, we believe that peacebuilding is not a passive process, but an active, bold reimagining of systems that perpetuate violence, exclusion, and fear. Our work in nuclear conflict transformation reflects this belief. While our engagement in space is still emerging, it's grounded in meaningful research, education, and strategic new partnerships that seek to amplify the voices calling for a world free from the existential threat of nuclear weapons. We are committed to helping shape policy, spark dialogue, and influence public discourse around disarmament and non-proliferation in bold and transformative ways. This mission is further strengthened by our recent appointment as the hub chair of the Sustainable Development Goal number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. So you have the banner there to present that. Why that matters is that the recognition of the Carter School by the United Nations in their SDG agenda, I think it's a critical moment for us, the opportunity of linking our work in peace, justice, and global security. So, in this Peace Week and tonight, you are going to see the reflection of this multidisciplinary, multi-level understanding of the matters of peace and justice. And to do just that, we are honored tonight to be joined by an extraordinary group of keynote speakers and contributors. First of all, Dr. Ira Helfand, a Nobel Peace Laureate and co-founder of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, whose tireless advocacy has galvanized a global movement for nuclear disarmament. It is a great privilege to introduce him shortly, but it's so wonderful to have Dr. Helfand as one of our keynote speakers. And I'm also delighted to welcome Dr. Vincent Intondi here, whose groundbreaking scholarship on African American resistance to nuclear war has shaped the way we understand the intersections of race, justice, and peace. And finally, I'm delighted to welcome Melvin Hardy, a global cultural strategist and curator of the Hiroshima Children's Drawings Project. His work at the intersection of the arts, peacebuilding, and nuclear disarmament brings a powerful perspective to this evening's program. And I've been working with Mal on different Carter School programs, and I must say it's a delight to cooperate with him and being able to benefit from his vast understanding and network of issues related to peace and conflict resolution. We also wish to acknowledge someone who is not physically with us tonight, but whose presence is deeply felt. Dr. Hideko Tamura, survivor of the Hiroshima bombing and author of One Sunny Day, had hoped to be with us this evening. Though unable to attend in person, she has graciously allowed us to share her voice and story, which you will hear later in tonight's program. We thank her for the gift of her memory and her enduring messages of hope. And my heartfelt thank you also goes to Brian Reichardt, writer and director of the documentary Pictures from a Hiroshima Schoolyard, which many of you had the opportunity to screen earlier. This film serves as a powerful entry point to tonight's exhibition of the Hiroshima children's drawings, and we are grateful to share his voice as part of this evening's narrative as well. So the program itself, there will be some speakers, but then we will have our students, our members of community being taken direct part in the delivery of these different aspects. So this evening, I must say, is more than a commemoration. It is a call to action, to remember, to reflect, and to work toward a world where nuclear weapons no longer exist. I appreciate that because, when I was speaking these words, I was just checking in my mind whether or not we can possibly live in a world without nuclear weapons. Wouldn't that be a fantastic dream, a fantastic goal for all of us? Considering that is probably one of the most significant threats we are experiencing, but then it doesn't seem to be really taking enough attention from us. Tonight, we want to change that, especially in our community. We want nuclear disarmament a critical issue here at the Carter School to discuss, to engage, to study, to research. And I think it really deserves that. So you will, the images, stories, and voices shared tonight are not just reminders of tragedy. Because if we just focus on tragedy, we are going to miss the real opportunity. Because we really need to focus on the testaments of resilience and blueprints for peace. So once again, thank you all for being with us this evening. Let this gathering ignite in us a renewed sense of responsibility. Let it inspire us to build a future grounded in dignity, memory, and shared humanity. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome our first keynote speaker, Dr. Ira Helfand. Dr. Helfand is a Nobel Peace Laureate. He's the co-founder of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War and a leading voice in the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. Dr. Helfand has worked tirelessly to raise awareness of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear war and to advocate for disarmament through medical, moral, and political leadership. And when I say tireless, I really mean it. I think this is the fourth speech that Dr. Helfand will be giving over the last 36 hours. He goes around with this message, really just to get people aware of the fact that we are facing one of the greatest risks, threats to humanity, and we should do something about that. So it's a great privilege to have Dr. Helfand here to talk to us, what we should do about that. So please, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this program. As you all know, from the subject of tonight's program. This is not going to be an easy conversation we're about to have. My job is to help everyone understand the enormity and immediacy of the threat that we face from nuclear weapons. In the 1980s, 40 years ago, we all knew, those of us who were alive then, knew how dangerous nuclear weapons were. We knew that nuclear war could take place at any time, and we knew it would be a catastrophe for the entire human race if it did. And at that time, there were books about nuclear war, there were movies about nuclear war. We had nightmares about nuclear war. And as a result of that intense awareness of the danger, millions of people, literally millions, in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, even in the Soviet Union, became politically active and demanded an end to the Cold War arms race that was pushing us to the brink of nuclear war at that time. And one of the most important things that I want you to take away from this tonight is the acknowledgement that that movement was successful. In 1983, the United States deployed Pershing missiles in West Germany with the stated intention of being able to fight and win a nuclear war in Europe. This was a totally insane idea, but it was the policy of the United States at that time. And we almost did fight a war in Europe. In fact, we almost had 2 nuclear wars that year, one in September and again in November. Less than 2 years later, Reagan and Gorbachev sat down and said nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. And the Cold War arms race ended. It was a complete reversal of the nuclear policy of both countries. When it happened, it was so abrupt that most of us thought this wasn't real, it was just rhetoric, but we were wrong. We really had brought about this profound change, and we had ended the Cold War arms race. Unfortunately, when the Cold War ended 5 years later, we all began to act as though the problem had gone away. It was better. The 1990s were not as dangerous as the 1980s, but the problem didn't go away. The warheads didn't go away. There were still thousands of them in the world. There are still 12,000 today. And they sat there waiting for the international situation to get dangerous again. And it has done that to an extraordinary degree, such that experts like former Defense Secretary William Perry have been warning us since 2018 that the danger of nuclear war today is greater than it was during the Cold War, although we are not paying attention to it in the way we did at that time. He first gave that assessment in the context of U.S.-Russian relations, and that was 4 years before the second Russian invasion of Ukraine. Things have gotten immeasurably worse since then, with the increased level of fighting, with a constant flood of explicit nuclear threats coming out of the Kremlin. But it's not just the U.S.-Russia dynamic that puts us again at the brink of nuclear war. Relations between the United States and China are the worst they've been since the 1970s. We're engaged in a very intense trade war, and it is quite conceivable that this could escalate to a military conflict over Taiwan. That was to remind me when to stop, sorry. Conflict over Taiwan, over shipping in the South China Sea. The situation in Korea, which seemed to get a little bit better in 2017 and 2018, has deteriorated again, and it is very tense and very dangerous. The situation in the Middle East was brought dramatically to attention this year when Israel and the United States bombed the Iranian nuclear facilities. And the situation in South Asia, which is the one I frankly worry about the most, we saw a war this year between India and Pakistan, 2 nuclear-armed countries, a war that only lasted, fortunately, for 3 days, but involved bombing attacks on airfields in both countries that housed nuclear weapons. It was probably as dangerous as the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we didn't pay much attention to it. Fortunately, that crisis ended without escalation to nuclear war. But basically, we dodged a bullet, and we need to understand that. In addition to these 5 geopolitical flashpoints that could lead to nuclear war, there are 2 other factors that we need to be aware of that are pushing us in the direction of this utter catastrophe. One is the rapid progress in cyber technology, which is making nuclear weapons more vulnerable to hacking and creating an increased danger that nuclear war will be launched by a terrorist group, by a criminal group, by some state actor that doesn't even have its own nuclear arsenal. This is a nightmare scenario, and the people in the US government who are responsible for cybersecurity, I think, are terrified by this prospect because they know that when it comes to cyber terrorism, the offense always has the advantage because the defense doesn't know what form the cyber attack will take. And then the final factor that we need to be cognizant of is the role that the climate crisis is playing. And people don't often think about the climate threat and the nuclear threat in this way, but it's important that we understand how closely linked they are. All 9 of the countries which have nuclear weapons claim that it's their intent to get rid of the nuclear weapons at some point in the future when the world is safer. The problem is that the world isn't getting safer, it's getting more dangerous. And it's the climate crisis which is creating this increased danger. And we need to know that even if we do everything that we are supposed to try to limit the climate change that we are seeing, it will continue for the next several decades. And as that happens, increasing areas of this planet will become unable to support their human populations. And that's going to trigger intense conflict within societies as people fight over scarce resources of food and water. It's going to cause intense conflict between countries as they fight over scarce resources of food and water. And it's going to cause migration on a scale that we have never seen in human history. Estimates are perhaps 50 to 150 million climate refugees over the next 2 or 3 decades. And this migration will cause enormous social instability in many parts of the world. And if, as all of these factors play out, nuclear weapons are still available, if they're still on the table, the chance of their being used is going to increase dramatically. So for all of these reasons, we need to understand that the danger of nuclear war is not some historical footnote from the 1980s that we can read about in books and forget about. This is a real and present danger. And given that, it is important for us to remind ourselves of what is going to happen if these weapons are used. Because even as we have tended to forget that the whole problem exists, we have definitely forgotten what's going to be involved if there is a nuclear war. Now, we've just had the 80th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, and many of us have seen pictures of the devastation in these 2 cities, and it's horrible, and it's a powerful warning to us of what nuclear weapons can do. But what we really need to understand about Hiroshima and Nagasaki is that they do not begin to prepare us for what is going to happen if there is another nuclear war today. The bomb that destroyed Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. 15,000 tons of conventional explosive. It was an enormous bomb. Most of the weapons in the US and Russian arsenal today are anywhere from 100 to 800 kilotons, 6 to 50 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. And if there is a war between the United States and Russia, it is not going to be one bomb on one city. We don't know the exact targeting strategy of either the United States or Russia or China for that matter, but the best estimate that we can make is that a major target city like Washington, like New York, like Moscow, like Beijing, is targeted with 10, 15, maybe more nuclear warheads, each of which 6 to 50 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. It is really hard to visualize what an attack of that magnitude would look like. I want to use a model to try to make this a little bit easier to apprehend. I'm going to discuss what would happen if a 20 megaton bomb went off. The megatonnage in this model is greater than we expect would hit Washington. The destruction I'm going to describe is an underestimate because we know now that you cause even more damage with many smaller weapons than you do with one big bomb. But it gets us in the right ballpark. It gives us a sense of how dangerous the current situation is. Within 1/1000th of a second of the detonation of this bomb, a fireball would form, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction, 4 miles across. Within this entire area, everything would be vaporized. The buildings, the trees, the people, the upper level of the earth itself would disappear. To a distance of 4 miles in every direction, the explosion would generate winds greater than 600 miles per hour. Mechanical forces of that magnitude destroy anything that we can build. This building would vanish. You wouldn't be able to find a trace of it. To a distance of 6 miles in every direction, the heat would be so intense that automobiles would melt. and to a distance of 16 miles in every direction, the heat would still be so intense that everything flammable would burn. Paper, cloth, gasoline, wood, plastic, heating oil, it would all ignite. And you would get hundreds of thousands of fires, which over the next half hour would coalesce into a firestorm, 32 miles across, covering 800 square miles. Within this entire area, the temperature would rise to 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. All of the oxygen would be consumed, and every living thing would die. In the case of Washington, 5 or 6 million people. New York and Moscow and Beijing, their bigger cities, 12, 15 million people dead in half an hour. And if this were part of a large-scale war involving the United States and Russia or the United States and China, this kind of destruction would take place in every major city in all of the countries involved. All told, 200 to 300 million people dead in an afternoon. And those who survived the fires and the explosions would find themselves in a hellscape that we cannot imagine. None of the things that we depend on to keep ourselves alive would be available. There'd be no electric grid, no internet, no cell phones, no food distribution system, no public health system, no system of law and order. And over the months following the initial attack, almost all of the survivors would also die. They'd die from radiation, they'd die from hunger, they'd die from epidemic disease, they'd die from exposure to the elements. This is only part of the story. I've only been talking about what happens in the countries that fight the war. But this would be a catastrophe for the entire planet. All of these fires would put 150 million tons of soot in the upper atmosphere, blocking out the sun and dropping temperatures across the planet an average of 18 degrees Fahrenheit. In the interior regions of North America and Eurasia, the temperatures would drop 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. We have not seen temperatures on this planet that cold in 18,000 years, since the last ice age. And under these conditions, most of the ecosystems which have evolved since the end of that ice age would collapse. Food production across the planet would essentially stop, and the vast majority of the human race would starve to death. A study that was published in August of 2022 showed that at current levels of weaponry, a war between the United States and Russia would, in the first 2 years, kill 3/4 of the human race, 6 billion people. The study stopped at 2 years. The famine would not, and we don't know what the ultimate death toll would be. Under these conditions, it is possible we would become extinct as a species. That same study also looked at what would happen if India and Pakistan had a nuclear war. And it found that even though it would be a much smaller war with many fewer weapons, it would still be enough to cause worldwide climate disruption and to trigger a famine that would kill not 3/4 of the human race, but 1/4 of the human race. 2 billion people in the first 2 years, including, by the way, 130 million people here in the United States, even though the war took place in South Asia. Again, the study only ran for 2 years. The famine would continue. We don't know what the ultimate death toll would be. So, this is not the plot of a grade B movie that I've just been describing to you. This is the danger which we allow ourselves to live with every day that we allow these weapons to continue to exist. And we have to understand that if we do allow these weapons to continue to exist, it is not a question of if. It is only a question of when these weapons are used. We have been told that mutually assured destruction, deterrence, is a stable situation, that nuclear war can't happen. Historical facts contradict that. We know of at least 6 occasions when either Moscow or Washington began the process of launching its nuclear arsenal, always in the mistaken belief that it was under attack by the other side. And on each of these occasions, we were not saved because we knew what we were doing, because we had wise leaders, or sound military doctrine, or perfect technology. We were saved, in the words of former Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, because, quote, we lucked out. It was luck that prevented nuclear war. And we have to understand that the current policy of the United States and the other 8 countries which have nuclear weapons is nothing more than a hope for continued good luck. And that is a totally crazy basis for security policy. So, that's the bad news. And there's plenty of it. But there is important good news as well. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature. It is not as though an asteroid is coming at the planet and there's nothing we can do about it. These are little machines that we've built ourselves. Most warheads are about the size of the chairs you're sitting in. We've already dismantled some 50,000 of them since the height of the Cold War. We know exactly how to dismantle the 12,000 that remain, and we could do it in about 3 or 4 years in a process that would take place on a bunch of military bases. The rest of us wouldn't even know it was going on, except by reading about it in the papers. It would not impact our lives at all. We can do this easily. What is lacking is the political will to do this. And that is why it's important for us to be talking about this tonight, because this is our job to create that political will. And we know that we can be successful in doing this because we did it once before in the 1980s. We built a movement that forced our leaders to confront this reality and to make the only rational decision to change course. Now, here in the United States, we have actually launched a movement called Back from the Brink, which is designed to bring communities across the country together, to bring this message to the general public and to our leaders, and to force a fundamental change in U.S. nuclear policy. Currently, our policy is based on the mistaken belief that nuclear weapons keep us safe. Our policy needs to be based on the reality. Nuclear weapons may make us very strong, but they don't make us safe. In fact, they're the greatest threat to our safety. And our security demands that we seek a world free of these weapons. This campaign has really grown dramatically in the last few years. It's been endorsed by 75, I believe it is, cities across the country, including most of the major cities: Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, Chicago, L.A., San Francisco, and many others. It's been endorsed by a number of state legislatures. It's been endorsed by over 450 non-governmental organizations, including most of the national faith communities, most of the major environmental organizations, and many scientific organizations. It's been endorsed recently by a number of labor unions, and it's been endorsed by a new student organization, Students for Nuclear Disarmament, which has formed in the last year and has activity on 14 campuses currently, and the expectation there'll be many more by the end of the current academic year. We have a resolution in the U.S. House of Representatives, HRES 317, which now has 34 sponsors, and a resolution just introduced into the Senate, SRES 323, which has 6 sponsors. There's been real progress in building a movement in this country, and we need to nurture that movement. We need to build it to the point that our leaders cannot ignore any longer the urgent need to eliminate these weapons. When I talk to audiences about this, I always worry a bit. It's a bit overwhelming. I think the reaction that most people have is, my God, he's talking about the end of the world. What am I supposed to do about it? And I think the answer I would offer to you is, alone, you're not supposed to do anything. No one of us is able to solve this problem alone. But none of us really can step back from that portion of the work which is ours to do. And that's really what I'm asking you all to do, to figure out what it is that you can do, how you can reach out to the communities you already belong to, your local faith communities, labor unions, student organizations, and get them to become active on this issue. I think this is something we can all do. And I think that if each one of us does, in fact, do everything that we individually can do, we're going to be successful in this endeavor. There's a tremendous responsibility inherent in this message that we're talking about tonight. If you know that the whole world is at risk, and you know there's something you can do about it, you have a responsibility to take action. You know, if you see somebody fall down on the street, you can't just step over them and ignore it. And that sits heavily on us. It's a burden. But I think we need to look at this in another way as well. Every one of us wants our life to mean something. We want to do something important. Those of us living today have been given the opportunity to save the world. And there's nothing better that anyone can ever do with his or her life. And I hope that all of us can see to taking up this challenge, to taking on this work in that spirit. There's a passage in the Hebrew Bible in which it's reported that God said, "Behold, I have set before you life and death. Therefore, choose life so that you and your children can live." That is literally the choice before all of humanity today. And so let us all choose wisely, and let us act with courage and determination and perseverance, that our children might live and that we might save the world. Thank you. Do I have time for a few questions? There time for a few questions? Yeah, I don't know. If people have a few questions, we could try to do that. And if people have comments, I would be very happy to hear them. Yes.
I'm wondering why the National Back from the Brink campaign is not stating that on your website. I've been in the business for 6 years. My name is James Wagner. I'm with the Maryland hub of Back from the Brink.
Yeah, Back from the Brink it is very much in favor of an extension of the New START Treaty.
I don't see it on your website. I see support for the two.
Well,
resolutions.
we're part of the coalition that called a meeting last Friday, National Coalition
Danny
of Organizations.
Yep.
Yeah. So we think that's an important intermediate step, and we were encouraged by the fact that Putin offered today to extend the treaty for a year,
So
and we'll see what comes of that.
yeah. So let's hope Trump falls in line with that. Yeah. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Yeah.
Once nukes are eliminated, how we can ensure that other countries like China, Russia will not build new one? What kind of mechanism can be made?
So I don't think that we can have unilateral nuclear disarmament. We need to work out an arrangement whereby all countries get rid of their nuclear weapons. And the central demand of the Back from the Brink campaign is for the United States to sit down with the other 8 nuclear-armed states and work out the details of verification and enforcement to negotiate a timetable for eliminating the weapons. That's going to be an essential part of the process. It's going to be relatively easy to verify whether countries are building new nuclear weapons. It's not like chemical or biological weapons, which you can cook up in your own house. The construction of nuclear weapons is a very large industrial process. Not so much assembling the warheads, but generating the fissile material. But there will probably be some risks involved in this. They're nowhere near the risks that we're running every day today with 12,000 warheads in the world. And I think it's also important to acknowledge right up front, there's no guarantee that we're going to be successful. The United States could launch this initiative. We could reach out to the other countries that have nuclear weapons and ask them to join us in an effort to get rid of them, and they could say no. But there's no reason to assume that is going to be the response. And there's absolutely no reason not to try getting this agreement. Because even though we can't know if we can be successful, we do know what's going to happen if we fail. And there's really no alternative. We have to try this. The question was, to what extent does the president's state of mind affect the danger of nuclear conflict? I think to a very great extent. In the United States, we have a system where the president of the United States has unchecked authority to launch nuclear war. No one can legally stop him or her from doing that. And we have had times when the people closest to the president were concerned that President Nixon during the last weeks of his administration, President Trump during the last weeks of his first administration, the closest people to them were concerned that they might launch a nuclear war because of their state of mind. I don't think any human being should ever have the power to destroy the entire world. But it is particularly worrisome when the people who have control of these weapons are mentally unstable.
Thank you. Your speech alone is one of the best I've heard in craft, and I hope that our students take note of like what it takes to actually give a speech that's good, so concise and so on point. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
I have a question about nuclear energy, and how does your group think about the prospect of nuclear energy for, in place of other forms of energy?
So let me say, first of all, I think they're slightly different subjects, but they're closely related. My organization, Back from the Brink campaign, focuses exclusively on the effort to get rid of nuclear weapons. The other group I work with, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and the U.S. branch of that, Physicians for Social Responsibility, also have a very clearly stated position against nuclear power, largely because of the fact that it's really inextricable, the technology involved in both nuclear weaponry and nuclear power production. If a country has the ability to run a nuclear power program, it has the ability to build a nuclear weapon. And we have seen that with the Israeli, Indian, Pakistani, North Korean, and Iranian nuclear programs. They all grew out of what were supposed to be civilian projects. So we need to understand that if we promote nuclear power, we are creating the conditions which favor nuclear weapons proliferation. But I think beyond that, at the moment, this myth is being pushed that nuclear power is the only way we can deal with the climate crisis. And that simply isn't true. Renewables are coming online many, many, many times faster than nuclear power could come online, even under the best circumstances. They're safer, and they take advantage of, the sun, which is there, without creating these vast quantities of radioactive material, which we don't know how to dispose of. So for all those reasons, I don't think that nuclear power is the appropriate solution, and I think that we need to instead take the money that is being diverted to nuclear power and direct that money properly towards rapidly building up true renewable energy sources. I think I could probably just take one more question, and then we should move on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So psychic numbing is, I guess, sort of a term that was used specifically for denial in the nuclear weapons context. And I think the antidote to denial and to psychic numbing is action. We don't want to think about this. We don't want to think about this because we feel powerless. And we think if we think about it, we're just giving ourselves nightmares. But if we're actively engaged in the process of eliminating this problem, that's different. And look, I give talks like this all the time. I'm immersed in this stuff. I don't feel, I'm not an unhappy or depressed or pessimistic person. I think we can solve this problem. And I think in the process of doing it, we're going to make the countries of the world come together in a way which they have not previously. Russia, China, the United States, they're all acting the way great powers have always acted. They are trying to see who's going to come out on top in a power competition. In the past, when we have urged countries to have a different approach, a cooperative approach that brings people together, it's always been framed pretty much in moral terms. This is the way you guys ought to behave. We have a much stronger message. That message, frankly, didn't work very well. It was right, but it didn't carry much weight. We've got a stronger message today. We're either going to cooperate, get rid of the nuclear weapons, or we're all going to die. And in the process of doing that kind of cooperation, the process of negotiating the agreement that we need to get rid of these weapons, I think we're going to create a model that will serve us in dealing with the climate crisis, with the next pandemic, with the resource crisis, with all the problems that humanity is going to face. And so I think that's the antidote too. Thanks.
So, Dr. Helfand, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, please join me for a round of applause for this inspirational and thoughtful talk. It was really great to hear your points, Dr. Helfand. And, you are so clear that this is not if, but when. I mean, I think that's just so striking. And we are facing global destruction, interestingly enough. And within that, the argument of deterrence that is often used by realists, the IR people, over we need nuclear weapons because that's a deterrence. Well, it's a matter of luck. If somebody pressed that button first, and then we are facing that, global destruction. So thank you for bringing all that to life and give us so much to think about. And the point that you raised about we are not on our own, we can do something about this. So that's my next speaker, who will be able to unpack, the role of public, mobilization of public in this process. So I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Vincent Intondi, who is a historian, professor, and author, widely recognized as a leading authority on the intersection of race and nuclear weapons. Dr. Intondi has spent over 2 decades researching, writing, and lecturing on the links between nuclear weapons and the Black Freedom Movement. His acclaimed first book, African Americans Against the Bomb, was praised for uncovering the role of African Americans in the anti-nuclear struggle. And his latest work, Saving the World from Nuclear War, examines the global disarmament movement of the 1980s. So I think it's going to be a wonderful segue from Dr. Helfand to Dr. Intondi to understand what we can do, us as people, public, part of the public, against this major threat we are facing. So, Dr. Intondi, over to you.
Thank you. So first, I'd like to thank ELP, of course, the person who really made all this happen, Mercedes. I'd like to also thank Mel, of course, my good friend. It's an honor to be sharing this night with my friend and colleague, Ira, and thank you all for being here. I'm truly honored. To civilize them, to Christianize them. They're biologically inferior. These are the justifications for slavery. You see, if you're going to kidnap millions of people and separate them from their families and beat them and rape them and kill them for hundreds of years for the sole purpose of making millions upon millions of dollars, you can't do it if they are mothers and fathers and sons and daughters. They have to be something else. They have to be less than human. They have to be subhuman. So we created another. We created racism to justify our actions to ourselves and the world. We created racism to justify our economic system. And this othering that was started has not stopped. In this country, we have done it every step of the way. And we see that consistently today. When we make the jump and we say that undocumented immigrants are not mothers and fathers and sons and daughters, no, they're aliens, drug dealers, rapists. Then it makes it easier to put children in cages, rip them from their families, terrorize them. You see, when we refer to Palestinians as animals, and they don't look like us or smell like us or talk like us or act like us, so the translation is not truly one of us, it makes it easier to starve them to death and commit this genocide. And this is how it was with nuclear weapons in 1945. Why, a week after the atomic bombings, when Gallup ran a poll, did 85% of the American public agree with Truman's decision to use nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Why did 22% of the American public wish that Japan hadn't surrendered, so we could have dropped more nuclear weapons and killed more people. Because there was a genocidal race hatred of the Japanese people after Pearl Harbor that is unprecedented in our nation's history. Far worse than anything we saw after 9/11 of people of Middle Eastern descent, or with COVID and people of Asian descent. And we didn't do this with Italians and fascists. We separated that. We separated Germans from Nazis, but not Japan. The whole country was guilty and were referred to as yellow vermin, monkeys, less than human, so it makes it easier to commit violence against them. So I'm not sure why anyone can look at the issue of race or social justice and not see the inextricable links with nuclear weapons. And many in the Black community saw this. It was why Langston Hughes was the first to publicly come out and ask, why did we not drop this on Germany or Italy? Why a people of color in Japan? It was why Bayard Rustin, one of the greatest organizers of the civil rights movement, who has been marginalized from history because he was gay, it was why he put himself physically on the line in Africa with Nkrumah, with others, to try to stop the French from testing their first nuclear weapon in Africa. It is why Coretta Scott King, who had been working on these issues from her days at Antioch College, taught her husband to take up the anti-nuclear banner. It is why Malcolm X met with atomic bomb survivors. Why John Coltrane visited and played in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Why a Black librarian at Georgetown and his wife, who cared about this issue and couldn't get anywhere in the white community, started their own group, Blacks Against Nukes, with one flyer and a fax machine, and ended up in Ebony magazine as guests in Hiroshima. They understood what King consistently talked about, which was an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. They understood King when he talked about his triple evils of militarism, racism, and capitalism, and how they were inextricably linked. Because they saw uranium mining and the cancer that was happening as a result of uranium mining in Native American lands, in the Belgian-controlled Congo, which now has been replaced with cobalt. They saw the production of nuclear weapons in Hanford, in the Savannah River Project, and in Oak Ridge, where African Americans and Mexican Americans were given the dirtiest, lowest paying jobs with no protection, filled with tumors. In fact, it was so racist in Hanford that the area that was segregated for African Americans were literally called the coon areas and never got any health care for what they went through. It is the history of nuclear testing on native lands, indigenous communities, the Marshall Islands, French Polynesia, the Sahara, Kazakhstan, Australian Aborigines, always a people of color. It is the use of nuclear weapons and threats of use in Japan, in Korea, in Vietnam, in the Middle East. And that's the larger historical irony, isn't it? That three of the leading nuclear states and nations, France, Britain, and the United States, all have a slave-owning and colonial past. Russia having its own internal slave-owning past. And so in a way, slavery, colonialism, nuclear weapons, all driven by the same instinct: contempt for other people's lives, and in many cases, Black lives. You know, Ralph Ellison said it in Invisible Man, third line of the book, cuts right to the chase. I'm invisible, you see, because you choose not to see me. So we scroll past the genocide. We scroll past the families being ripped apart by ICE. We ignore what nuclear weapons have done and continue to do to all of us. There is too much to lose, as Ira pointed out, if we do not do everything we can to eliminate these weapons. As President Obama once said, remembrance without resolve is a hollow gesture. Awareness without action means nothing. So if you leave tonight with your folded origami crane and forget this entire night existed, then we failed. We will not be free until every person on this planet is free from the fear of dying from nuclear war and the process that Truman put in place. Free from those countries who possess and threaten us on a daily basis of ending life on this planet unless we kowtow to what they want. And Ira was right. We saved the world from nuclear war in the 80s, and it can be done again. In the 1980s, we built arguably the greatest citizen-led mobilization effort in United States history. Millions of people in the streets demanding an end to the arms race. Thousands of African Americans pouring out of Bed-Stuy and Harlem. Leadership of these rallies mostly being women and members of the LGBTQ community. People from the Midwest, from the Deep South, architects for nuclear disarmament, nurses for nuclear disarmament, business executives for nuclear disarmament. And when that happened, as Ira pointed out, in 1987, when Reagan changes course and meets with Gorbachev to sign now the INF Treaty, landmark to eliminate whole parts of the arsenal. Of course, what people often leave out is when Gorbachev, visionary who really ended the Cold War, meets with Reagan. Gorbachev says, I'm ready to eliminate them all right now. Every last one of them. All I ask is that this Star Wars plan you got, don't weaponize space, keep the testing in the laboratory for 10 years, and we can eliminate them all right now. And Reagan said no. But I was also right in that we've got to celebrate the wins. 70,000 nuclear weapons in 1986, down to 12,000. 25,000 at one point in the United States, now less than 5,000. South Africa gave up their nuclear weapons program right before Mandela came into power. We've seen it done before. And so when we're trying to think of hope and action, and not just the doom and gloom, I find hope in the 120 nations, mostly from the global south, who categorically rejected the use, the production, the transporting, and the testing of nuclear weapons by signing and ratifying and putting into force the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons through the United Nations. It is a tool to shame other countries. It is a tool, like we did to eliminate chemical weapons and landmines. It is a tool that we can use to get us to zero nuclear weapons. I find hope in those organizers that successfully got the New York City pension fund to divest $475 million from nuclear weapons making producers. That's significant. It matters. The best way that we can ensure we don't have nuclear war comes from you, from human beings, from people, ordinary folks. And we have to find agency. When we say, I might disagree with this one where Ira says individually, we can't stop this. I disagree. We can individually. Right? There are small acts of resistance. You may look and say, this is too big for me. This is too overwhelming. Agreed. But you can be conscious of who you wear, where you shop, who you follow, what you read, who you listen to. Those are all daily acts of resistance. And then, of course, there are the larger movements. Ask yourself, whether it's this issue or anything you're passionate about, am I educating someone? Am I motivating somebody? Am I inspiring somebody? Those three things are what guide all my work. And a lot of this has to deal with education. Think of where we are. But for 20 years, I've taught freshmen and sophomores who come into my class knowing nothing about this issue. That has to change. We need to teach students much earlier. We silo students at such a young age. Pick your lane, physical sciences or humanities, which makes no sense. Why should somebody who's studying nuclear physics not also study creative writing or music or, God forbid, a philosophy class on ethics? Right? Why are we separating these things? We have figured out how to tackle really difficult subjects like the Holocaust and slavery for young children. We haven't done that with this. How much fear is enough? What can we teach them? At what age? How do we combat the neighbor I have, the 14-year-old who comes out of his house really happy, and when I ask why he's so happy, he tells me he killed so many people in Call of Duty that he got a nuclear weapon as a prize that he can't wait to use tonight? So education is such a big piece of this. And for education, people need to see themselves in this history. It's part of why I started down this path. Why would a young black student care about this issue if they look in this history and only see white people? We look for somebody that we can share a common ancestry with, that looks like us, that talks like us. It says, this is somebody I identify with. For me, very early on, it was John Brown. Right? So we have to look at how we are reaching people. And there's a lot of great resources out there, but it's about the distribution. We can't expect teachers, educators to just know it. They're already spread too thin, right? They already have no bandwidth. And so it's not about creating new curriculums. It's not about meeting state standards. It's about helping a teacher who is having their kids in English class read A Raisin in the Sun to use that time to also talk about Lorraine Hansberry's anti-nuclear work and how her last play before she died was about a nuclear holocaust and what happened to the survivors. If you're in a music class and you're teaching jazz, that's your time to talk about John Coltrane doing a concert in Nagasaki, Charlie Parker signing anti-nuclear petitions. Talking about hip hop, you can bring in Gil Scott-Heron's work on this, MF Doom's work on this. You could talk about athletes that fought for nuclear disarmament in the NBA and the NFL. There's all different ways you can reach students without having to redo the entire curriculum. And others will argue that it's on the politicians. We have to reach the politicians in Congress, the president to act. Maybe years ago that was true, but I'm not sure I believe that anymore. Trump said this. Yesterday he said, maybe we should get rid of nuclear weapons. Maybe we should do this. Well, quote, the United States must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability. Donald Trump. Let there be an arms race. We will outspend Russia and China into oblivion for this new arms race. Donald Trump. And by the way, from the moment I got on this stage to right now, the United States has spent over $107,000 on nuclear weapons. Just for me being up here for these few minutes. When we have schools that don't have heat. It is time to speak to truth more directly and boldly. States have to be held accountable for failing to keep their commitments. And rather than ask and be encouraged to make new commitments, are we hopeful we're going to trust that Trump and Putin are going to extend New START? We know from experience that almost no state will just act on their own. We need to move past this point of enabling states to do performative work, pretending to care about us. They promise action, and then we pretend to believe them. Rather than calling on states to act on agreements like the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, we need to publicly frame the issue and pose the question as what can we do? What should the people do? What should universities do? What should civil society do to create a movement for disarmament in education, in youth, regardless of state action? Bring it to a point of critical mass where they can't ignore us, even if they try. This is a long movement. And again, I'll disagree with Ira. It can be tough. Lucky for me, when it's 11:30 at night and I'm reading yet some more papers or books on nuclear war, my wife is able to say, maybe that's enough for tonight. You don't get those victories right away, right? It's harder. It can be depressing. But as Rebecca Solnit said, the true impact of our activism will not be felt in this generation. That alone is a reason to fight, not to surrender into despair. I know that when I die, institutional racism and nuclear weapons will most likely still be on this planet. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for my niece, students, kids who aren't even born yet. You chip away at it a little at a time. You don't know what action you're doing, what conversation you might have when you leave here. Somebody that just looks at that crane, something you post, you don't know what action is going to be the thing that sparks the movement. That's why every single thing you do is so important. Don't doubt that. We must make clear that we will not stand by and allow future generations to live like we have lived, with the fear of dying from nuclear war or becoming refugees as a result of the decisions made by a few leaders in the nuclear club. I know it's hard. My students will tell me, I'm trying to put food on the table. I'm working 2 jobs, trying to pay off student loans, hoping the cops don't kill me on the way to school or I get pulled over by ICE. I feel helpless about genocide. Oh, and by the way, you want me to stop nuclear war? Let me know when I have time for that. I get it. I do. But as Dr. King said, what does it matter if we achieve all this social justice if we're dead from nuclear war? And so today, now, we should be asking ourselves, what are our values as individuals and as citizens of the world? What do we value for our children? Everybody in this room has gifts. What you do with it is your gift back. I can't draw a stick figure to save my life, can't play a musical instrument. I have no artistic ability at all. But if you do, if you're an artist, use it. If you're a poet, then spit. If you're a musician, then play. But use your gifts to make this world a better place. Let this be the moment, this night, at this event, at this Peace Week, that we collectively with one voice say no more Hiroshimas. When you are doubting your power, what you can do, where we are going, remember the words of the great poet and writer Audre Lorde when she said, "Survival is indeed the greatest gift of love we can give one another." Thank you.
Right. I don't know how you feel, but I have goosebumps all over. And Vincent, thank you so much, really, for that inspirational keynote. I think what you reminded us of our own power, what we can do individually and also as community. And I think that's so important because in the current environment, with all these challenges, you often feel helpless, as that we cannot do much vis-a-vis all these problems, right? But we have choices to make, and we should make this happen. And I'm so proud of calling you a colleague and a friend, because you are an individual can combine your academic depth with real passion for your subject. And then I think that was a great opportunity for all of us to listen to Dr. Intondi. So thank you so much. With that note, I'm now going to hand over to my partner in this show, Mercedes Alzo, for the rest of the program.
Okay, so as we continue this evening, as we were planning this event, one of the voices we knew that we wanted to include was Dr. Hideko Tamura. As Dean Ozodome mentioned earlier, she could not be with us tonight, although she wanted to be. Dr. Tamura is a Hiroshima survivor, also known as a habakusha, which is also known as survivors in Japanese. I had the honor of speaking with Dr. Tamura in preparation for tonight's event. And I want to just pause there just for a moment to just consider the gravity of that. Dr. Tamura is a woman who lived through the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, and she's sharing her story with us nearly 80 years later. And that is pretty significant. So since that devastating day, Dr. Tamura has dedicated her life to peace, education, and healing. She is the author of the memoir, One Sunny Day, and the founder of the One Sunny Day initiative, which promotes global peace, nuclear disarmament, and survivor testimony through education and dialogue. So, although she is unable to be with us in person tonight, she has graciously given us her blessing to share some of her words. And among them is a deeply personal poem also titled One Sunny Day, which is a poetic reflection on that fateful day that changed her life and the world forever. It is my great privilege to present this reading to you now, performed by Carter School's own Carter School ambassadors. These are undergraduate students. So please join me in welcoming Grace McIntyre, Joshua Farmer, Norma Palmer, Grayson Tibbett, Maximilian Crotty, and Jonna Tossin.
One sunny day, I lost my universe.
The midsummer sun glaring in the bright blue sky, tall green branches quivering in the wind, whispering to a happy child, just home from a lonely country village tucked far away. Good morning, child. Welcome home. The oxygen, called happiness, filled the air.
Shimmering lizards on the granite moving about peacefully, dancing colors map in the butterfly wings. My kitty Kuro-chan catching sun rays, grooming her coat. All were so well on that day.
To be hugged and fed, we stole away from the country for this moment of love and safety.
Suddenly, from the sky, swift movement of blinding flash, turning into a boulder of raging heat unleashed on humans and buildings, as the scorched earth shook with deafening sound in the primordial dark.
Searing heat, raging and spreading, no time to pull you out, mama, no time for you cousins. Rivers were flowing. Voices muffled, no cooling for the burns. I watched the red sky into the night, the last of my childhood.
Hiroshima turned to ashes. My world was no more, along with my oxygen called happiness. Forever changed city, Hiroshima watched us return, scars hidden in shame. For they stirred the unthinkable, for they peeled off our dignity.
On the flowering riverbanks grew 4, 5, 6-leaf clovers, picked by a lone child at sunset, searching for her lost garden and universe, visible only in her mind's eye.
On one sunny day began a search for life and the conditions that must be. on being a human, anywhere, anytime.
Come on, we can do much better. Give it up for the Carter School ambassadors. These are our undergraduate students. These are the future of peace building. So we thank them. Thank you all so much. Thank you. And it's wonderful, as we were preparing for this, their enthusiasm was through the roof. They were really excited, one, to be asked to do it, and two, they were very willing. And they came together on their own, and they talked through how they would present it. So this just goes to show that we have young minds that are interested in these things, that are concerned about these things, and they want to share their voice. All right, my favorite person of the night, Mel Hardy. There are many favorites, but I am honored to introduce Melvin Hardy, who is an arts and culture strategist, peace advocate, and the curator of the Hiroshima Children's Drawing Exhibit, which you all have viewed tonight. In addition to his global work in the arts and disarmament, Mel serves as an instructor with the Carter School Political Leadership Academy, and he is a valued member of our Dean's Council. His insight, generosity, and commitment to advancing peace through culture and education continue to enrich our community in immeasurable ways. Tonight, he'll share a few words about the making of the documentary, which most of you had the opportunity to view tonight, which was written and directed by Brian Reichart. And he'll speak to the vital role of the arts in preserving memory, fostering empathy, and advancing the cause for peace. So please join me in welcoming Melvin Hardy.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. And it really is an honor to be here at the Carter School. We must acknowledge the Carter School for what it is in the field. This is a theory and practice school. It engages in knowledge transfer through its scholars here, its practicing professionals here, through undergraduates, certificate holders, master's level, doctorate level, and postdoctoral students. I want to start first with an acknowledgement of Dean Alp, thank you, sir, and Mercedes and the rest of the Carter School team here. I first want to have you just look around the room at what I consider to be beauty. If you look at these paintings, drawings, these images around the room, they are done by children survivors of the bombing in Hiroshima. We never ignore Nagasaki in this calling of the atrocities, but in this case, these were coming from the Hankawa Elementary School. There is a documentary film that accompanies these drawings. The documentary film, which was aired in its entirety earlier this evening, has these paintings, drawings as the central actor of the film. Of course, they were conducted by the children in 1947 as a gift of requite from a church who sent over materials for a school. It was actually also an orphanage and another entity in Hiroshima in Japan because of the issue of compassion for others who were harmed. So these images are distinctively different from others that you might see of Hiroshima drawings. These are colorful. They have the hands of children, all between the ages of 7 and 12 years old. And they reflect an image that they have around what it means to engage in a new world, a world of beauty, even though they were living in the squalor and destitution of an environment that was completely destroyed. For this, I want to acknowledge the film director and its producer for giving us the opportunity to lift through film, or let me say, the output of a creative to produce a film. And now can we show the trailer? For those of you who did not see the film in its entirety earlier, I think we are queuing up the trailer for the film. And might I also say that this film was presented throughout the nation, and there is something called the Carriage Report. So PBS, Public Broadcasting System, aired this documentary film, which is called Pictures from a Hiroshima Schoolyard.
Hello, my name is Brian Reichart, and I'm the writer and director of the documentary film Pictures from a Hiroshima Schoolyard. On behalf of my producer, Shizumi Shigeto Manali, and myself, let me say how honored we are to have our film be part of this powerful event. Thanks to Mercedes Alsop, and special thanks to Mel Hardy, who you'll actually see in the film, for making this possible. This film tells the true story about a simple exchange of gifts in 1946 and 47 between a church in Washington, D.C. and a school in Hiroshima that stands less than a mile from where the first nuclear weapon used against the human population was detonated. It's also the story of the pictures born of that exchange that represent, illustrate, and still radiate a message of peace and reconciliation. When Shizumi first mentioned these pictures to me, drawn by school children who lived among the absolute ruins of their city, I was, like many, expecting to see images of horror, death, and destruction. When I saw them, I was actually flabbergasted. And I had the same question that everyone asks. How are these images, full of playfulness, beauty, and joy, even possible, given the dark and desperate circumstances in which these children lived? Were these children commanded to draw these positive scenes, not to offend the Americans who had gifted them the supplies they used to create them? Well, we found out. We actually interviewed the artists of these pictures, that the answer was no. These pictures were drawn of their hopes and dreams and expressions of friendship and kindness without any hint of sadness or anger. I'm extremely proud of this film and quite gratified that it is often shown as part of events like this one, and that it might be useful in the campaign to convince people to abandon the insane proliferation of nuclear weapons. A futile effort, I feel, is like collecting matches in a room full of gasoline. Beyond the specifics of nuclear conflict, I hope the message of this story translates to any human conflict, including those we're experiencing today across the world. And that message is that no matter how broken a relationship has become, peace is always possible. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity to share this film. I hope you have a very successful event, and I hope you enjoy and gain some inspiration from the pictures from a Hiroshima Schoolyard. Thank you.
In my world, everyone's at peace. There's no need for armies and men, no need for police.
I was struck by the colors and their vibrancy and how they spoke to the flourishing of life rather than the destruction of life.
There is no sadness in these pictures.
本当に何にもない学校だった。
When the babes can play outside in the garden.
それは学校の先生がね、アメリカから原爆を受けてきた子供たちに。
Their house never hardened.
だからこういう風なのが欲しいなっていう思いがあったのかなというふうに思います。
It's really amazing that those kids were able to draw pictures like that at that time.
The pictures are going back to Japan, and they will be reunited with the artists who drew them.
Up until that moment, they'd just been pictures, and now they were people.
In my world.
So these images were housed at All Souls Church. I happen to have been the administrator of the church at the time, and I was serving under the behest of board member Chuck Woolridge, who is here. Please raise your hand, Chuck. And on a certain August day, a person, John Steinbach, who is here, thank you, John, he was bringing Hibakusha to come because these drawings, these paintings were world famous. They were famous in Japan. And there was a pilgrimage that they come to Washington amongst their other travels. In this case, they were going to protest the Enola Gay and its movement to the Smithsonian Institution out in Udvar Hazy, I think it was. But they had to stop by the church to look at the drawings. Well, I did not know anything about them. I did recognize that there was something in a calligraphy box, so I went to retrieve them and put them out on the table, and there was such reverence given to those drawings when the Japanese people saw them that I then thought that perhaps there's a new ministry to be developed at the church, and that is a ministry of relationship building from a community at the church, our congregation, engaging with people who have been harmed. And the predicate of peace building, which is one of the signatures of All Souls Church, was born again at the church. So there are two origin stories for the life of these drawings at All Souls Church. One, when they were produced, 1947, they toured the United States under the aegis of the then Department of War and the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. They toured the United States and then came back to the church. They didn't know what to do with them then. So the former administrator took them to her home in Potomac. They then came back because John was bringing Japanese visitors, and then she went back to get them, brought them to the church, and that's where they stayed. John was visiting with Japanese survivors every year. So they have their second life now. We got them conserved because they were in bad shape after 50 years, having been produced on newsprint. They were friable. They came back. We were able to get the board to authorize that they be conserved. We had them digitized so that we can reproduce them, these enhanced reproductions, which we carry around the country. And some of them went back to Japan in 2012 to reunite them with the artists that created them 65 years later. So it's a very fascinating story, a very important story. So I want to make some linkages here. What we talked about was that creative output found their way into a theological organization, and relationship was built, and in many ways, coalition was built. So here we are tonight at this event talking about coalitions. The title of this is From Hiroshima to Hope, and I would like to present that we should all be trafficking in the currency of hope. That we should all acknowledge that this creative output is because each of us who are created are also creative. It's an axiom that we should acknowledge that each of us is endowed with creative spirit, and we who are creatives have the ability to imagine how to influence policy decisions made by the apparatus of state and the market makers, to have those of us in civil society participate in decision-making and policy-making for the better flourishing and betterment of all citizens. That is our charge. And that is our hope. That as a result of our relationship building through events like this, and Dean Alp, thank you very much for guiding us to the approach that this school, the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution, will find a way to embrace this aspect of peace building, both internal to the person, that we can find peace to understand how we can be saviors to our planet by embracing one aspect of transferable social justice work by looking at this issue of nuclear weapons abolition. So I want to thank you all for engaging in this discussion this evening, embracing these drawings. Please visit All Souls Church to see the entirety of all 48. Come to service sometime so that we can talk about this with you. We enjoy the benefit of providing this as an opportunity to share this message of a world free from nuclear weapons.
Thank you so much, Mel. And that was a great way of concluding the proceedings of tonight. And your emphasis on hope, that's just exactly what we need, especially at times we go through right now, and also the risk and the threat we are facing with nuclear weapons. So I promise that you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, and I will honor that. So I have 15 minutes. I will ask our keynote speakers, Ira and Vincent, would you mind joining me here? We have 2 microphones, perhaps that may be convenient. We have a couple of microphones to go around for you to ask questions. And I remember the gentleman over there on the left-hand side, he had a question. So I need somebody to help me with microphone.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. And before I ask it, I'd like to thank the speakers for these passionate and empowering speeches on this hugely important topic. The question I wanted to ask has to do with the fact that me and 14 of my fellow people from our region, the South Caucasus, have also been have also had the opportunity to listen to these speeches. And while these matters are, as Dr. Helfand spoke about, mostly in the hands of the great powers of nuclear-powered states, they concern the whole world, including our region, the smaller countries in it. I come here as a representative of South Ossetia. We also have representatives of Abkhazia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia. These are smaller nations that have little to do with nuclear weapons, but the fate of whom also depends on the resolution of this issue. And my question was, is there anything, in your opinion, in the opinion of the speakers, that these countries and people in these countries can do to participate in this movement, to play their part in solving this problem, however difficult it might be to solve? And I'm grateful, and I'd like to acknowledge that Dr. Intondi spoke a lot on that, on the power of individuals to impact that, but still I would like to pose that question, and I wonder if you'll have anything to tell us.
Well, I think your observation is exactly right. The danger of nuclear war is created by a handful of countries, but it affects everyone. And, you know, there was a great bargain created in the late 1960s in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, where the countries that had nuclear weapons, in exchange for a pledge from the countries that didn't have them to remain non-nuclear, the countries that had them promised to give them up. And they never lived up to that. And as a result of that, after the complete failure of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in 2005, we started the organization, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, to create a vehicle that would give voice to the countries that didn't have nuclear weapons, to try to bring them more to the fore in the international conversation about nuclear weapons. And that led, as Vince pointed out before, to the adoption in 2017 of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The UN vote was 122 to 1. Since then, there have been resolutions at the United Nations that have been even more countries in favor of this treaty. And it is a vehicle by which non-nuclear states can raise their voice, record very clearly their demand that the countries that have nuclear weapons stop terrorizing the rest of the world. So, you know, at this point, I believe it's 98 countries have signed the treaty, 75 have ratified it. There are a number of countries that have not, that have supported the treaty in various votes that have not signed and ratified yet. And the more countries which join the treaty, the greater the pressure there will be on the countries that have nuclear weapons.
I could just touch on this as well. Number one, yes, you can work on various countries signing and ratifying the TPNW, but it just shows you that the nuclear powers often use this as essentially blackmail, right, to get what they want. And it also shows how things are so interconnected, because another thing would be if a country that doesn't have nuclear weapons could say, has the leverage to say, we won't trade with you, we won't work with you as long as you're possessing them. But this shows the problems when you have countries that are financially indebted to nuclear powers, and so they can hold that over them. You know, a lot of the work I'm doing now revolves around Africa and nuclear disarmament. And when I was in South Africa recently, it was so clear that, you know, as a continent, they're damn near monolithically against nuclear weapons. Nuclear power is a separate issue. And they do have such leverage in terms of cobalt. If they would sit there and say, we're not going to, you don't get our cobalt, goodbye cell phones, chips, all these things, unless you disarm, then you have real power. Problem is, of course, so much of that economy is based on that trade, and you have corrupted leaders of state, etc. So it's looking at what bargaining power, what can you do to isolate, but it also shows you that in some ways you're limited because everything from the IMF to the World Bank to nuclear, it's all interconnected, and that makes it extremely complicated issue, you know, to say what can we do as an entire nation.
Thank you both. And I think when it comes to nuclear disarmament globally, we also need to recognize that we seem to have some double standards, right? For some countries, we go as far as bombing them so that they cannot have nuclear arms. But with other countries, we know that they have weapons, but we don't even know whether they have it. They don't even accept it. So we treat countries differently when it comes to nuclear power. So the question, I think, is really important, especially in the context of South Caucasus. So by the way, we are hosting 15 young people from Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia as part of a U.S. State Department-funded project. This is the second year they are here. This is the new cohort of students, and they are staying with us for 10 days in order to develop their dispute resolution skill set. So by the way, can you just raise your hands, those students from these regions? So earlier on, when we were talking about young people and their engagement in peace building, and we are so proud here at the Carter School that we are able to do this with young people from the South Caucasus. We really see them as change makers and what they are capable of. And this program, such programs, giving opportunities to young people, is hugely important. So we can take next question. Yes, Rich.
Thank you. Well, thank you for those wonderful speeches and also for your work. I want to say that I heard kind of two messages, at least on the strategic side, and I wanted to ask you about these two messages. One message I heard is that the cause of eliminating nuclear weapons is so important, and the destruction, the costs of not eliminating them are so, in some ways, obvious, that simply promoting that issue gives you the possibility of eventually convincing nations and people around the world to eliminate those weapons. But the other message I heard, especially in your comments, is that an anti-nuclear weapons movement needs to be part of a broader movement. That since nuclear weapons, as you pointed out, is connected with dehumanization, is connected with racism, it's connected, I would say, with oligarchy and other evils of the society, that the people most likely to listen to you and to agree and to do something about eliminating nuclear weapons are going to be people who are part of a broad-based progressive movement. Not that everybody has to be to want to eliminate nuclear weapons, but that it seems to me perhaps more realistic to think of this in terms of being a part of a movement for social justice, anti-war, and anti-oligarchy. And if that's not going to happen, it's less likely, it seems to me, that there would be an elimination of a successful movement to eliminate nuclear weapons. I wonder what you thought about that.
Let me speak to that. I think it's a mistake to pose the elimination of nuclear weapons as a progressive issue. I think that progressives clearly are in the leadership of this issue right now, but we have seen historically that we can build a much broader coalition for the elimination of nuclear weapons or for the decrease in the nuclear threat. In the 1980s, the Freeze movement was much broader than the progressive community. It was led by progressives then, but the resolutions on the Freeze were co-sponsored in both the House and the Senate by Republicans as well as by Democrats. And I think there's an opportunity here really to reach across the aisle and to reach people who disagree on many other issues.
To that is that in the 1980s, there were such things as sane Republicans, at least non-MAGA Republicans. You actually think you can eliminate nuclear weapons with dealing with the ultra-nationalists that you have to deal with now on the other side of the aisle?
No, but I think there are a lot of people who don't fall into either the progressive or the ultra-nationalist camp. And I think we need to be careful as we build this movement that we make it as broad as we possibly can, because frankly, if this is a progressive-only movement, it's going to fail. We don't have, the progressive movement in this country is not strong enough by itself to bring about this change in policy. And the many other issues that you alluded to are incredibly important, and we need to work on those, and it is appropriate to introduce them also into this conversation. But we have a very short time frame, I think, to deal with the nuclear problem. I may be being overly pessimistic, but I don't think we're going to live another 10 or 15 years if we don't get rid of these weapons. And I think we need to have that kind of frame in mind as we approach this problem. What can we do to bring about the elimination of these weapons in that kind of time frame? And in order to do that, we're going to have to focus, I think, very, very, not exclusive, we're going to have to focus enormously on the nuclear issue per se. And I think we can bring in all kinds of people who are not part of the progressive movement in that effort. And we should do that. We shouldn't create barriers to good people who may disagree with us about other issues joining in to help get rid of nuclear weapons.
So if I could touch on that, the second book I wrote was on the 1980s, this topic. In the 1980s, there was a lot of this arguing back and forth in coalitions of, should it be a single issue? Should it be an anti-Reagan thing? Should it be a progressive thing? These were the same battles that were happening then. And a lot of the folks that, when I interviewed them for the book, in the 80s had said, it should be a single issue, or we need to, these types of things. Years later, when I interviewed them, said, I didn't really understand how these things were connected. And in retrospect, maybe we should have done a better job of connecting these issues. And so while I agree you want to do as much as you can to build a big tent and a big coalition, it shouldn't just be progressives and, try to get sane Republicans, as you mentioned. There is a thing of, if you're trying to reach younger folks, you're trying to reach the Black community, if you're trying to reach certain groups, again, they need to see themselves in this entire thing. Why would they buy into this? Why would they? It's not until I go to Baltimore and I'm meeting with Black parents and explaining we're spending trillions of dollars on nuclear weapons when we have enough to blow up the world, and they're asking their kids to bring space heaters into their schools because they don't have heat. Now they buy in. They realize, okay, now I'm part of this. So I think it does pay off to have a bigger coalition and seeing how these issues are connected. If we're trying to, but again, I'm not saying we neglect or, I do a lot of work with the faith-based community that I may disagree with on a certain issue, but I also find a lot of common ground going, well, kind of tough to call yourself pro-life if you're for nuclear weapons, right? Oh, I get it now. So there are absolutely common ground that you can find that we did have in the 80s, but we're more polarized now, like you've mentioned, than we've ever been. So that's the difficult part. And now you add in social media, and it's a whole nother, ballgame. Yeah.
I just have one other comment, which is I think that it is quite possible to reach out even to people who are very concerned about other issues on this issue alone. For the same reason, it's possible to reach out to anyone. The danger of nuclear war is the ultimate threat to everybody. And people who are very concerned about their living conditions, about being able to put food on the table, about the racism that they're experiencing in their daily life, are also quite capable of understanding that they need to get rid of nuclear weapons.
And
all by itself. And I think, and I think it's somewhat dismissive to say that we can only talk to certain people if we talk about other issues that they're interested in too.
Well, the other common thing is, too, that I've seen is take something as simple as cancer. Pretty much everybody in this room, I'm assuming, has either been affected or knows somebody who's been affected by cancer. So that doesn't need to be a right-left thing. That doesn't need to be a progressive it doesn't. If you're in favor of nuclear weapons, by definition, you're in favor of cancer. They call it cancer for even the military officers working in those silos. So it is a common ground to say, again, this isn't a right-left issue. We just don't want you to die of cancer. We're not in favor of nuclear weapons. And again, find common ground. So I think there's a lot of openings to find common ground with folks that we typically, wouldn't on this issue. But I do think that trying to relate to, trying to see how these things are intersectional, me personally, I think that is the best way to go as far as building a big coalition.
Great. More question? Right. We are going to make this one last question because we are at 8 o'clock. And I promise that you are going to have enough time to socialize and take this questions further. But let's make that the last one.
So thank you for your great speeches. And so you mentioned that the button that to destroy a world should not be held onto an unstable person. And I really agree on that. But as a South Korean, many of us are frightened that we might face a most unstable regime that is probably ready to press that button. And that leads to many South Korean probably supporting that we might also need a nuclear weapon to protect ourselves. But after listening to your speeches, I agree that that thought is kind of wrong thing. But how can we, like, what is a key element for us to convince such frightened South Korean to be relieved from those frightened feelings? And how can we convince them to be part of your movements? I really want to know that.
It's a really good and a really difficult question. I think the answer that we have to offer is simply that having nuclear weapons does not protect you against somebody else's nuclear weapons. And in fact, it may significantly increase the chance that the weapons will get used. If South Korea were to become a nuclear weapons state, and I know there is serious consideration there to doing that, they may be able to destroy North Korea with their nuclear weapons, but that's not going to keep them from being destroyed by the North Korean weapons. It's the point I was trying to make before. Nuclear weapons make the countries that have them strong, but strength is not the same as safety. And this is really tough, I think, for people to understand, because historically, during most of history, being strong, it did make you safer. You know, if you, and I think we see this in our individual lives, if you're walking down a dark street and somebody's coming at you and they're carrying a big club, and you've got a bigger club, you feel safer. But if your club is a stick of dynamite that's going to kill you if you use it, then you're not safer. And we're having a lot of difficulty as a society making that jump. You know, Einstein, I think, summed this up when he said that the nuclear weapons have changed everything except the way we think. We still think that the stronger the weapons are, the better they are. But the weapons we have now are so strong that our own weapons will destroy us. And I think that's the way we need to approach this question with people like the people of South Korea and the people of Japan and the people of Taiwan, who are increasingly worried that the United States will not protect them as it is supposed to if they're attacked. And we're seeing the same kind of thinking also in many parts of Eastern Europe. So it's a tough one because psychologically the truth doesn't fit with what we think is true.
Yeah, I'll just add, and then we can wrap up, that it just further shows, if you research it, deterrence doesn't work. It's silly. It doesn't work. If deterrence worked, then Ukraine wouldn't be fighting back. They'd be deterred. If deterrence worked, would Al-Qaeda have done what they did? They'd be deterred by our nuclear weapons arsenal. So if South Korea has them, would that deter North Korea from doing anything? Like, we see example after example, India and Pakistan, as I talked about, nobody has been deterred by this. It is just luck that we haven't destroyed ourselves. And so that idea, you're hoping that, and look at the world leaders we have right now in possession of nuclear weapons. We're hoping that they're all sane and logical and rational and deterred. It is really just completely false thinking and just incredibly dangerous. And when they say that we're the naive ones, we're the idealists, we're the ones that are pie in the sky, to me, it's the folks that believe that deterrence is going to hold are the real ones that are naive in this whole thing.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that was a great note to conclude our session. And I must say, I think this was one of the most inspirational sessions, Peace Week sessions we have ever organized. There was so much food for thought here, so much really good reasoning and justification for the role that we can all play in this process. And I think, what Malhadi, Dr. Vincent Intondi, and also Dr. Ira Helfand did for us is that, they empowered us by giving us clear thoughts in terms of that, yes, the task ahead is enormous, but we can all do something about that. And I think let's take that message to heart. And next hour, we have the room, we have some food and drinks, and please just kind of explore those issues further. Our speakers are here, you can spend time with them, and our faculty, our staff are here. That table over there, we are hosting 3 emeritus professors, Rich Rubenstein, Chris Mitchell, and Carlos Slutsky are there at that table if you want to meet the previous generation of the Carter School. A number of faculty are here. So really, it's a great opportunity for you to get to know us better. So Thank you all.
Can I just make a quick announcement, which I should have made before?
Sure.
Sorry. I always forget to do this. I urged you all to get involved with Back from the Brink. I didn't tell you how to do that. If you are interested in getting involved in this national campaign, our website is very easy to remember. It's preventnuclearwar.org. And I would urge you all to visit the website. Students who might be interested in the student group, Students for Nuclear Disarmament, their website is students, the numeral for disarmament, studentsfordisarmament.org. Thank you.
Thanks, Ira. All right, over to you, ladies and gentlemen. Just enjoy yourself. Thank you.